Were we supposed to wait?
Call meeting to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Jarenzinski,
Here.
Parker,
Here.
Parch,
Here.
Dickerson,
Here.
Haley. Here. Howard.
Here. First item is to allow for public participation at the beginning of the meeting. We have at least one member of the public. Any desire to speak at this point?
I always have a desire to speak.
Well, then, certainly you are.
Whether you have a desire to
The
listen.
floor is open to you.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for your service. It is much appreciated and very, very much needed. I have a couple of things. One is a question, is this the full battery of people who are now currently on the Finance Advisory Committee?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct. I believe the mayor
So
has
you are-
at least one more appointment to make, but
One more appointment to make, so there's one vacancy.
that is my understanding. Is that correct? Yes.
Okay. The other one is, I'm going to beg you again to see what it is that you all can do as a board to look at the situation, the financial situation with the library board. As you know, that has been a little bit of a controversy. And the other is the TIF, especially, maybe in the last couple of years or so, if you can look back and see how TIF has been expended, primarily in the area of the administrative costs. Poor Molly has been badgered with this, as has the entire council. There's been a desire to have more information about how TIF dollars have been expended, especially as it relates to the budget. So I don't know if you have to get a command from the mayor or what, but the public sure is interested, and you're the ones with the chips of knowledge in your heads. You know how to read the spreadsheets and all of that. So thank you.
Okay, approval of the minutes. We have, okay. All right. So, I'd ask for a motion for approval of the minutes that don't exist. Are there any additions or corrections to the non-existent minutes? All right, then we move on to the property tax levy overview. Point of personal privilege, I taught the Illinois property tax last night, so I happen to be going through a lot of students asked about their tax bills, and they were all over this area, so it just happens to be on the agenda tonight. So I am going to turn it over to Molly to go through the fairly extensive packet material with respect to the property tax. This can also, within the tax levy and the use of property tax funds, I believe that it would be germane if anyone were to bring up an issue related to the tax increment financing districts, since they are part of the property tax. That would be germane to the item that is on the agenda.
Okay, so as you guys know, in the financial policies, that there's a policy specifically related to property tax levy and your revenue and expenditure policy, and it outlines the principle set for how you fund your levy. And so under the current policy, that the city prefers to keep the tax rate low, but the following components are in priority order. The very first thing is to fund the levy for police, fire, and IRA, which is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund pensions, per the actuary calculation.
Question?
Yes.
You have the base levy financial policies. These are That's what you mean, 100% funding for police, fire, pension, and IMRF. That is the 100%
That would
directed by
fund
who?
the city council's
City council
financial
directed.
policies.
100%.
Adopted policy.
Okay.
No. The policy states 100%.
Policy statement.
Policy.
Okay. So that is 1A. The second would be the FICA and then general obligations for bond and principal and down to the general fund and then additional personnel. So historically, 1A for the past few years has not been funded. So IRMRF in the current levy that we did for 2017, there's no funding for IRMRF. And there's about $450,000 of police and fire pension funding that is not funded by the property tax levy in the current levy that we're in right now.
Is it being provided from any other source?
There'd be other general fund revenues, which is primarily sales tax. So the policy says that they'll be fully funded through 1A for police, fire, and IRMRF. Okay? So when I looked at this, we went over the actuary reports in the recent meeting that came presented. So I'm not going to rehash all the changes that were made, but now we have the actuarial funding. So for police, the pension funding is just a little over $3 million, and for fires,
3.5.
type that wrong. Yeah, 3.5. I'm gonna have to fix on page 3. I had it in the sheet. So, sorry, I didn't catch it till
That's okay.
But, so fire pension 3.5. And then we look at IRMRF and Social Security. IRMRF was projected at 770 or 771 thousand, and then Social Security would be an additional $625,000. Those right now are both not on the levy, in the current levy. Then we look at debt. So we do have general obligation debt for the city. And so the total amount that will be included in the levy will be $5.5 million. But we abate down to just the levy that's related, or the debt that's related to the library, which leaves just a little under $490,000 for that levy. But we use all other general fund sources, or some of them are TIF related, the TIF funding, to pay for those debt services and not the property tax.
Wait a minute, I'm confused here for a minute. Yeah, so employer required funding is 6.6 roughly for police and fire, plus another 1.4 if you funded IMRF and Social Security. And I see what you're saying. The 2000 levy amount for debt was 5, okay, fine.
But what we basically do is we abate down just to the library related debt.
Okay.
Okay, so then the next one, the corporate levy for the general fund, we do not have a levy for that. And then library levy. The library board reviews their levy and they present a recommendation to the city. This is in speaking with the library director. And they were supposed to be discussing tonight, but I think she had stated she missed putting it on the agenda for tonight. We'll talk about it next month now. So the official recommendation will come after that. So this was written in anticipation of that. So their levy need, and what they're asking for is $2.1 million. Now, that's not talking about the library rebate, so I'll bring that up.
Is that their bond, is that the debt repayment, 2.1 million, or is that?
No, that's their
for
operations.
Operation,
It's just,
that's not their
So the
debt.
490 under debt, that's library's debt.
Right. We'll come back to that. Let's
Yeah.
go ahead and go through the entire.
So then-
Okay, I see that now, yeah, I see that.
So it was two separate.
I wasn't trying to cut you off, but.
So the next things, we have special service areas. No, it's fine. I tried to write this memo in a way that would help.
Yeah,
And I broke it out a little bit more than what it had been in the past. So special service areas are not for the entire city, they're specific to an area, that's why it's a special service area. So the one example I put here is Greek Row was created to finance, operating costs for street lighting on those properties. So for the 4 that we have in place, most of them remain the same as they were. Last year, Greek Row does increase a little bit because I'm trying to keep it at the maximum rate for Greek Row, and the current SSA amount does not cover total expenditures in that area. So that will go up from 15,700, a little over 700 to 16,400. And that's targeting if our equalized assessed valuation is a 4% growth. So I contacted the county. Their official growth information on EAV doesn't get released until late in October. It doesn't help us when we're trying to put this together ahead of time. So I did call and we talked about what is a good estimate for me to use, what's their sense, and so the sense that I got from the county was that it's a 4% increase in growth. So,
All right, now let's make sure that we're very, very precise about this. The increase in EAV, that 4% is a figure they're using for existing EAV that was here before and will be here now, correct? That does not account for new growth.
no, they had no estimate on new growth.
Okay, so this is really just an increase. It's not really growth. In the terminology of taxation, it's not really growth. It's just an increase in the value of existing property.
Right,
Okay,
property.
so it did grow, but I want to make sure that we keep that separate.
Okay, so the county said 4%.
Okay.
So when we look down, I tried to break it out into what are the kind of most useful learnings and how to look at them. So if we're following the policy as city council has indicated, that, but only the very first one, 1A, which is fully fund police, fire, and IMRF. Then what I was calling on here, the base levy, that's corporate, the one for your main city operations, is 0. Police pension is the full amount, just short of $3.1 million. The fire pension is a little over $3.5 million. IMRF is adding now back in at 770. And then the debt service, I show it after abatement because that's what really ends up on the tax bill for your debt, okay? So that's the 494. I will note that this debt service after abatement, what I found out last year is the county always adds 1% to whatever's decided by city council on debt. So, well, so instead of not acknowledging the 1%, because that's not I've never seen that practice before where I've done tax levies before. I did calculate this 494 to include that 1%. So when we get it to the county on the official ordinance, it'll be less than 1%, but really the homeowner will see the 1%. So the levy they will see is this 494 because it includes that 1%. The county's adding. Now they add that 1% because debt is a very fixed cost for the municipalities and the governments that levy tax. And if your property tax is coming short of 100%, in theory, you're short of your debt payment. So they add the 1% to ensure that whoever's levying a debt captures 100% of the dollar amount they need to pay their debt. So I added it on here with 1% because it's really what you see on your tax bill. Okay. Any questions on that? Was it odd?
I think we'll come.
I did, but you explained it, so. What do you do when they're over the 1%? Where does that money, does it then go back or does it come off the next? Is it just sitting in a fund to apply for it the next?
We use it for debt service. I mean, in the end, anything you levy for debt
Right.
service goes to debt
Okay.
service. And then
So where does it show up in your property tax bill?
under that debt line item, so it's not separate.
What
with the-
debt?
You're saying it's included in the numbers?
So on the city levy, when it breaks out, there's a,
There is not a line for
For
that.
that.
There's not a line for that on your bill.
Well, there is on the sheets that they end up
That may be.
releasing, but I don't, I'd have to look up the bill to tell you which line.
Well,
it shows
I can
on.
show you a bill, yeah. I mean, I'm not, I mean, I was just looking at this last night, so I'm.
Just a theoretical bill.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all public information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not, and it's not going out over the airwaves, so I've got to pull my bill up. I wouldn't have any problem with that. Anybody?
It's on your bill somewhere, but if you have for
No,
us to
it is
figure out
not
which.
on the bill,
Just,
unless,
Make them a $20 bet, Molly.
Huh?
Make them a $20 bet.
now, it may show up on the library, but it does not show up.
And just call it debt, is what you're
No, it's not even, it's
Right.
not, there isn't even a debt line
saying.
item.
Right, that's,
So, all right, so,
just pension.
yeah.
It'll be separate.
Well, actually,
No, those are
yes,
separate.
those are, yeah,
Pension separate.
And corporate separate.
yeah, and that's it.
SSAs are separate.
No, they aren't. Well, yes, yes, they are. Yeah, I'm sorry. The SSA's are.
So
But what gets funky, all
when
right.
I approve what the tax levy is for the county,
Yeah, that may
It
be,
shows it on
they're
there.
gonna show, well, that's, the reason for that, the reason why it's gonna all be in there is that one of the jobs of the county is for non-home rule jurisdictions, they have to make sure that you don't exceed your
Right.
rate limit on every fund, every item. You're a home rule jurisdiction, so.
but that comes into play like with Great Grove, because we can only do a maximum rate of the 0.25. So then we can't exceed.
Well, that's, okay, well, we don't need to, it depends on how you do the SSA, but yeah, okay.
Right, that was. the
So-
only-
So right here, okay, there it is, you've got Kishwaukee Community College, the city of DeKalb, the county, the library, the park, the road and bridge, I'm in an SSA,
It's in here.
but my
Right there.
point is, no, it is not, when you get your property tax bill, this is the way it works.
They had a feature on here, I think, where you could click, I don't know, can you
Well-
click on it? No, they had it where you could get it further broken down what equals that amount. But yeah, it'll all show a city DeKalb growth.
But, okay,
But the SSAs are separate from the library.
I understand that. Let's continue until we're done before, I don't want to dominate the discussion. What? Go ahead.
Can you check that assessment details? Maybe it was under that.
It's not.
It's out there.
Yeah,
I'm
I just went
looking
through
at it.
this, I just went through this in detail last night because people wanted to see different things.
What's the 2017 rate showing, UDCal?
1.22.
Yeah,
It's 12 point, well, this rate is gonna be higher because I'm in an SSA. 12.47969. I think that the right one is, the one for most people is like 12.45. 12.4. That was 2017 payable in 2018.
And it's that 1.22, I forget the next two digits. What is
Okay,
called the
here's-
base levy.
I don't care about those digits way out there.
So there's your, that's what the assessment looks like.
Huh, that's,
It does say, it really doesn't give a lot of information. It
that's
doesn't tell you.
unfortunate because it would be good to know the difference here when you're looking at your bill.
Sure, no, absolutely it would, and I'll take a look. I mean, you may be right, I think there is some more detail on the bill itself, because I recall the school pensions being out, and I recall the city's pensions being out, so it does separate the corporate rate
Right.
from the, but it's
Not
not.
online.
It doesn't
No.
separate the different pensions either.
It should separate police and fire, but maybe it doesn't, I mean, that's an empirical question, we can look it up, so,
But essentially, the base levy, what I'm calling here, is equal to where it says city of DeKalb when you're looking right there on your.
okay, and so what you're saying is that the debt is being levied under the city and not the library?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
all
library
right, just,
debt is under the city of DeKalb.
all right,
How that shows on.
nothing new about that.
No.
It's all,
Yeah.
Right.
Right now, I lost my train of thought. Okay, well, so all of those together is what so back to the financial policies 1A levy would equal a $7.8 million levy.
What percentage increase is that over the last year's actual?
I can get you really close.
It'd be nice to have a column on there with the current.
is this at 0.1979?
Well, that's the rate increase, yeah.
Oh, the tax rate, okay.
Because we really levy a dollar amount, the council really levies a dollar amount at the end of the day.
Maybe a little closer.
Well, we can bring it up, right, somewhere. Bob probably has it. The actual levies from last year.
The actual levy from last year, if you could find.
That's 6004, it's 6 million.
What is it?
It's a little over 6 million. So.
Look,
Okay.
I think that's an important number. You keep working on it, I'll get you the number. Oh, you got it, all
He's
right.
looking at.
Great, fantastic.
So, this column, or the table on page 4 shows what the property tax levy looks like. And then on the top of page 5 would be what the expenditures are. In this case, police, fire, IMRF, and that are equal to the levy because you're fully funding them per policy. Now, the next chart assumes no increase on your home. Then that would be an increase to the home owner because we've increased the levy and it's 0.1979% over the rate last year. So last year was the 1.22 and now this would be 1.4247%.
No, wait a minute,
That's not assuming 4% increase.
wait, no,
So that's-
hold on. Okay. That's, I get nervous when we put percentages out there. Okay. The projected tax rate is 1.4247, no percentage on it. It's 1.4247.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're
And
saying.
the increase is 0.1979 number. The percentage increase in the rate would be 0.1979 divided by 1.22 something.
So just ditch those percentages.
Yeah, because it gets really confusing
Yes,
because
it does.
if you want to talk percentages, you got to multiply never mind. It's complex because that's a mill rate. That's the rate per $100 of valuation, and the valuation is 1/3 of the market, so. Yeah. Okay, anyway.
So in this case, because we weren't fully funding 1A last year, it would be an increase to the tax amount that we estimated at the $90 million.
To get the full funding.
For $100,000.
For the full fund, right, yeah,
Right.
okay.
Okay,
I'm with you.
that's the policy one. So we developed kind of the second option, because last year what council chose to do was to target the rate. So we put it together last year with the growth estimate of the 5.2% on EAV. It came in a little under, so actually the target rate wasn't, it was a little bit lower than the target rate. So to anticipate that, and that 5.2% the county gave me last year was actually in the October number, so it was a more solid figure from the county. Right now, we're working off of kind of their best guess until the October numbers come out. But what I was trying to do is, if we're going to target a rate, because the levy is a dollar amount, and we're making assumptions on what growth will be to the equalized assessed valuation, there's fluctuation in what you estimate the AV and what it ends up being in that like 1 week period in April where we have to sign off on what the tax levy and the rate will be. So I tried to break this into kind of two scenarios. You put together the tax levy to target the current rate with the county's estimate of 4% growth. And I was calling that the most likely levy. That's what we would then use to put into the budget, financial forecast, and use that from, if that's the direction from that point forward. But what I would ask is then we actually adopt the property tax levy at the optimistic level, which in this case that we show is assuming a 6% growth in EAV. And then council would adopt the levy with the 6% growth estimate, so the dollar amount that equates to, and then you'd ask them to adopt a kind of a fill-in-the-blank abatement ordinance. So come April, if the EAV comes in at 5%, I can abate down the levies to get to that target rate we've been trying to get to, right? To keep the rate the same. And so it'll reduce the levy amount that was adopted, right? Because that's the optimistic amount. But if 5% is more than the 4% we put in all the financials, there's potential to have a revenue increase there. It's a little tricky. It's just because of the timing and the.
I must be really dumb, because I don't understand why this is so difficult. There's one piece of this that is pretty much known. All you have to do is look at the multiplier for that the township assessors use, and that tells you what because this wasn't a reassessment year. So if you just look at a piece of property, they apply a multiplier to it. And that multiplier can vary by the type of home, but it's a constant. So they know, I mean, those assessed values for next year have been out there forever. So,
Not on the new construction. That's really where your variance comes.
okay, now, hold on.
Okay.
Hold on, okay. So the components of the growth are an increase in the value of existing property, which should be known pretty close to certainty. And then you're going to estimate the new growth, okay? So the floor that you're going to expect is what the multiplier was on the existing property. That assumes no new growth, okay? And let me just do a quick here, because I don't know, it just seems like we're beating our heads here without having the best information that we have available to make our own guess. I mean, yes, you're gonna get a number from the county, but we have to know whether that number makes sense. So, again, okay, let me just take a quick calculation here. And I've done this across a number of properties, so I know that this is pretty close. It may not be perfect, but okay. So it looks like, according to this, oh no, I'm sorry, this is not correct. over here, okay. So maybe, because they have published what the assessments are for next year. You know what the, because in April, you had to challenge if you were going to challenge. And so, as I recall, those were published. But I do not see the 2018. Yeah, I don't, unless those assessment deals are, unless they're based on the other numbers. But, okay. But anyway, there should be a number that we have, and okay. I don't see what I was.
Let me ask a question that you brought up before. Using that estimated, the 4% estimated growth on EAV, that's basically on property that existed.
Actually,
Construction.
according to what I'm seeing, I'm wrong about that. Because I thought it was that high. It looks like if the numbers here are correct, it may be like 2.6, 2.7% on existing property. So the 4% would include some new property.
I would think most people might say, I don't think my house is worth 4% more than it was a year before.
Yeah,
So it's
But
an
remember,
average.
but it's an average of the previous 3 years.
this writes a rolling average.
It's a rolling average.
So, right, so when we say we think EAV growth is 4%, your home might be 6%, and your home might be actually a decrease of 1%. And if something happens.
That should not be true in a non-reassessment year, unless there's something that happened to your home.
Right, but right, that's why I was about to
But
say,
it's
we
not
have
just
to
the
trigger
market.
something
Yeah, right,
for that to occur.
right.
Yeah.
You're saying it should never go down in a non-assessment year. Is that what you just said?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, they have, like between, let's see here. So from, starting in 2009, my assessment went down in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. And then it went up in 15, 16, 17.
What were you talking about those years? I should have.
I wasn't talking to anybody, I've never appealed. That was the sales records, and it's a
Yeah.
3-year, it's
That's
a
why I
3-year
took
rolling
the
average.
property taxes has dropped, because people thought it was immediate, like, no, it takes a few years to catch up.
But what happened as a result of that, when your EAV drops and you're levying the same amount, your tax rate goes up. Okay, anyway, please continue, I unnecessarily interrupt.
That's okay. Bob, what's that number for last year, the 6 million?
Last year, levy
What,
6,492,669.
6,492,000.
Yeah, 6,482,669.
So it's 1.4 million up.
correct.
It's 23.4%.
Okay, back to the equalized assessed growth target, try to target the same rate.
So back on page 5.
Back on page 5.
Okay.
The base levy here, when we look at the very bottom table, is the income, so that's the property tax levy amount. And so just like Commissioner Trzynski said, that the base levy for policy is the significant increase of what we levied last year. So if we're trying to target the same rate again, and using the county's estimates for EAV growth, ends up being what I was calling the most likely amount. This is similar to what they did last year, right? So we tried to target the rate last year, and it came up a little bit lower, but this would target the rate to stay the same again and capture the growth on the equalized back to the financials, that's a little bit more of a conservative approach, because I do believe the county has a good sense of why they're, saying 4%.
Right.
But really, the difference for the most likely and optimistic is in the new construction. And to capture the new construction, and you're trying to target the same rate, this to me gives you the most, or gives council the most flexibility to be able to capture all the growth without us underestimating the amount of the growth. So by levying at the optimistic and also asking council to adopt, basically, I was calling like a fill in the blank ordinance. Come April, I will abate those levies to get to that same rate. It can't go any higher, so if we underestimate and for some reason the AV comes in at 8%, you cannot go any higher than the 6%. You wouldn't get that growth above the 6%, and that would change the rate then for the homeowner.
You can, yeah, correct. You can't increase your rate.
Correct. That's how the part of doing most likely and optimistic. You set a ceiling when you adopt the levy. The only thing you can do is bring it down.
Right, which is why you should always, as a financial strategy, I'm not talking about a strategy with respect to accountability to the taxpayers. That's very, very important. But in order to make sure, especially if you're not home rule, you got to make sure that you have enough room to levy what's necessary when you get the actual number in, and you can decrease it. You just can't increase it.
So this option kind of shows you the two scenarios of what would be budgeted based on the most likely, and then what would be asked to be levied. And you can see if you look at the most likely, it's 6.76 million, so that's less than the fully funding for policy of the 7.8. Because it's only capturing 4% in the EAV growth. And then if you're capturing 6%, the levy goes up to 6.9.
Now, all the numbers we're talking about with respect to EAP are without the tips, correct?
Correct, this is just, I don't have the tips in.
But now, is the base, the tip base in that EAP?
Yeah. Right, before the increment.
Before the
Yes,
increment,
it's included
okay.
in this.
All right. So, does anyone have an objection with starting discussion?
About TIF?
On the whole thing, which would include TIF. I want to go back to, unless there's an objection, I want to go back to something that Tom has raised before. And I think we need to try to get as close to doing this right, in quotes, as possible, okay? We need to pay, this is my opinion, we need to pay up to, or we need to pay 100% of 1A from property tax sources. Okay, no. That's not the same as from the property tax levy.
That's correct.
Okay, so what I'm saying there is that, for example, the water department's payment in lieu of taxes, since the only thing we're really taxing for is pensions, correct? Property tax?
Right.
Pretty, okay. So, as an accounting matter, you should take that payment in lieu of taxes and put it into the pot as part of the property tax related funding of the pensions. In addition, that portion of the increment that is that portion of the increment that would be attributable to the city's tax levy. Okay, so approximately 9.5% of the increment. That also should be subtracted out. Now, if you charge it as an administrative fee, fine. But that should be subtracted out and taken out of the TIF and put into the pensions as a payment derived from property tax sources. So that the TIF properties, including the increment, are paying the same as any other property toward the pensions. Okay? And if by adding those things up to 100%, you can subtract that off of what you need to get from the levy. Because neither of those things will be in the levy itself. So as long as you achieve that, now, whether you want to go further than that is great, but you don't have, in order to fulfill the responsibility to do 1A, you don't have to levy that full amount. I've come around to Tom's point of view on that. I think that's correct.
The water pilot has actually increased.
Well, that's fine.
So-
What it is. It is what it is. Yeah, you know. I mean, what this allows us to do is say, we're out of the sources that are in lieu of property taxes, then we're going to pay the account that would have been receiving those property taxes had they been paid.
And this mathematics, that's what I'm proposing, the way we should present it.
And their potential, okay, they're potentially, if, we'll have to look. There may be some other contracts that the city has that may fit into that category where you need to take a portion of that because there would have been property taxes that are really payments in lieu of taxes, not something else. And I don't think that's going to be extraordinarily difficult to do. And even if we just capture 3 or 4 of the big items, we're probably talking about, could be as much as $500,000, I would think. I'm guessing, that's a total guess. But I think that allows us to have our cake and eat it too, in the sense that it's responsive to the city council's desire to meet their obligations, but not, or, yeah.
And this won't create problems removing, because obviously it's going somewhere.
Remove money.
Is it, I mean,
Here.
what's going to
Moving it
stop
from
from
one
that?
place
Is
to
this
the
a
other.
short-term Band-Aid and then long-term we're
Long-term,
The
we have
argument-
a gap right now. It doesn't matter if we move money from the water fund and count it
Okay.
towards the levy amount. You have a financial gap in your structural deficit that's greater than this.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I'm not denying that. And I'm very concerned about that. But, go ahead, Tom.
Well, my concern about the discussion, and it's always been staff's presentation methodology that has been the concern about trying to discuss this need against the property taxes that are being paid, particularly looking forward that these are going to have to increase to 15 to 20% per year ad infinitum to catch up with pension obligations that we are behind on. Besides the fact, I think that the reality is from a proper accounting perspective, that those taxes certainly being paid by the water fund is a direct tax. The 50% surplus out of TIF coming back to the city, which is a line item on your revenue down in other income, is pure property tax. So those two items to me are the most obvious.
Well, and your administrative costs, to the extent that they are attributable to personnel,
And
should be fully loaded for benefits.
benefits. And now that you brought that discussion up, I brought it up at least twice before in the same conversation with the levy. You've got a fire contract that is substantial, that is a fully allocated, fully benefited contract with NIU, and you're trying to get fully allocated funds out of your recovery through your insurance liabilities for your ambulance services. There's $2.4 million in revenue, of which probably 20% of it, I mean,
Well,
I picked the right number, but 20% of that number is pensions.
Well, I think that when you talk about the university, that's a payment in lieu of taxes. I mean, that ultimately that contract is contracting for services that would be provided to a tax exempt
Yeah.
organization.
Okay.
I think we could have an argument
That's
about
800
about
grand.
that. We could have an argument about the ambulance fees, but now here's what should not be lost in this discussion then, okay? And this is where you may get addition by subtraction, okay? Because remember that the comment that I made was only with respect to 1A. Okay? If you've listened to me long enough, you know that one of my things is that we should be financing pensions as completely as possible out of property tax sources. I think it's a good financial business, and we can talk about the efficacy and the appropriateness of doing that. But you could say, okay, this $7.95 million levy, okay? Well, not only if we levy that, that's going to more than cover 100% of police and fire if we apply these other sources of revenue to police and fire. But then that frees up in the calculation. Mathematically, it frees up the ability to use that tax levy to fund additional pension dollars in the form of IMRF and Social Security. So, I mean, just because you're finding these ways to backfill out of these other sources, that doesn't mean that you necessarily need to decrease the total. It just means that you may be able to make those dollars go further in terms of the priorities for the property tax levy, and that would be a separate discussion.
Well, it also ends this constant push for higher property taxes when you are really already covering. I think you're going to get very close depending on which pieces you put in there. You're going to be pretty close to that 7.8 million. I think it's that big when you put these other pieces to it.
I
So-
don't total. So what I keep finding is we enter in contracts that might, if we're lucky, cover 100% of our costs, and it doesn't cover the fund balance requirement that comes along with it. So I don't think all of our contracts are actually funding what we need either. I think that's a separate issue we need to look
It
at.
is.
as well.
It's just a piece of what we are funding these pension costs.
A part of it, but it's not, I think fundamentally, we should have had a larger contract to cover everything we needed, and we're not getting the contracts where we need them to be to fully apply.
You know, NIU stepped up and increased their contract substantially over the last 5 years, higher than the inflation rate.
Now, it's important that people recognize that there are at least 2 separate contracts that we're talking about. There was one that was in the paper recently that is not the contract that we're talking about. The one that was in the paper recently was the pay for overtime for staffing special events. That's a separate contract, and you know, there was some talk, and that contract's been in the paper in the last month or so. That's not the contract we're talking about. There's a contract for, I believe it's fire and EMS services with the university that is essentially a payment in lieu of taxes.
But as contracts come up, that contract that you're talking about, that isn't the fire and EMS service, if you read the financial impact section of that, we did discuss the need to increase the costs that need to cover the whole amount of what the city's really putting in.
Gross costs.
So as they come up, this is a constant discussion discussion at the staff level and into the negotiation at council level. So you'll start to see some of that come out as we go through.
It's gotta be fully loaded. No, no private sector organization is gonna sell their services in that way without having it fully loaded.
Well, I know our prior conversations were in depth on this, and I talked to Kathy numerous times about that, and in open session, we discussed that at least theoretically, those are intended to be fully loaded costs on an hourly basis, so that you are covering all the pension obligations.
Right, but then we're also missing, so that beyond the pension, we're missing the fund balance requirements that we've set.
Well, I'm gonna discount that, because this is the revenue piece. I mean, we're talking about the revenue.
Yeah, but you can't do that, because what Molly's saying is that, it's double entry bookkeeping, and so every time there's an expense, okay,
But we're not
even though it's
increasing,
balanced
we're not
out.
increasing the expenses are already there, so the 25% obligation already exists, and it's part of our calculation.
But you're
On-
finding
now, wait a
it from
minute.
other sources.
On the contract for special events,
Okay,
there
that
are,
is. But
and that should be fully loaded, and you
But-
would,
But the 700,000 or 800,000 days contract.
no,
that's
no, correct, that should be just covered by,
That's revenue. Our costs are already stated.
it should be, yes.
Right, but that fund balance requirements be covered by some other revenue.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that cost is already there, so
Right,
to
but
me,
then-
that's irrespective.
The fund balance part is being covered by some other revenue that you would probably.
What's it, all right, hold on.
It's not
The
incremental.
university, okay, you've got a cost that you've calculated for the fire department every year,
Correct.
okay? Now you contract for the university, okay? Now, in realistic terms, the fire department is gonna respond. If there's a call, they're gonna respond. Is there an increase in cost that is attributable to the university contract for fire and EMS?
What I'm finding in most contracts is the cost for service is $100, right?
Okay,
Right now, the fund balance requirement is 25%, so your total cost is the 125, and we're only
No.
charging like $80 or $90. So you're using.
Molly, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. The $80 versus the 100 makes sense. But
Right, so
it's
we're
not,
leaving
it's
that
not
as
loaded to the 125 though, because you have no new expense.
Right.
But it's not, so that, it becomes a problem, because one, the $80 is eating into the fund balance, so you don't have $25.
All right, no, there's no argument
And the
about that.
$80 tends to stay every year, and this goes from 100, 110,
Well,
115.
right, well,
And so we're having the
that's,
issue of maintaining your fund balance, we're not capturing what we need
but
to capture.
that's not because of a contract, it's because of the pricing in the contract.
Right, so this is a constant issue in our contract.
All right, well, we need to make
And that's
sure.
what she's saying, we're not following it, we set that up, I'm baffled, but we set that up and we're saying, well, shouldn't apply here, it might apply here, it's like, that doesn't make sense to me, we shouldn't be arguing the fact, I agree with you, if it says 25%, that should be at that, you can't say, well, this is all income, and
No, that's
someone else
not,
is eating into it.
no, that's not the point.
What is
Here's,
the point?
okay. In a case where, let's talk about, but for. If you didn't have the contract, where would your expenses be at? Okay? So in the case of the contract with the university, this is a payment in lieu of the taxes that they would pay, okay? Now, that right now is going to police and fire pensions, but it's a payment for services, okay? There is nothing, the fund balance requirement is based on the expenditures in the general fund. There's nothing about that contract that would increase the expenditures in the general fund. So in and of itself, that contract would not carry with it in the absence of these other pricing issues, it would not carry with it an additional fund balance requirement of the city. However, the other contract, which is for special events, that requires the dispatch of equipment and personnel that would not otherwise be there, with the exception of, or outside of this special event. So we're paying personnel overtime, and in theory, the contract is supposed to collect for that overtime. For every dollar that we spend on these expenditures, we've got to also come up with 25 cents
Right.
for the, fund balance. Okay. Now, what Molly's suggesting, or what Molly's saying, is that let's just consider that second case. Not only are we not financing our cost of providing the service without loading it with the fund balance, we're not even putting in the additional fund balance requirement. So if the cost is $100, we need to cover $125 to maintain our fund balance. But we're only charging like $80. So we're just, with each contract, we're falling further and further and further behind.
The pricing model is all messed up.
So as contracts come up, we
Yeah.
are addressing and we're trying to change that model. But this also applies to tax levy in that if you don't fully fund what your policy is stating, other revenues are picking it up.
Correct.
And other revenues are picking up the fund balance requirement when these costs go up.
Correct.
And these costs are going up significantly each year. And so we're at a structural imbalance that we're not fully meeting that actually as a whole for the general fund. All of these things come down to where, in the 5-year forecast, which is also on our agenda, so we can talk about it, you have a funding gap. Our expenditures are increasing this rate, and our revenues, they're going up, but they're crossing. Yeah.
Well, what other
So your
options?
revenue growth is more like 2%, while your expenditure growth is like 3.5%.
And how often do we do new contracts?
All the contract cycles are different.
Well,
We've
I
been
mean-
tending,
What other options do they have? What would they do if we say, we gotta have X? We're here, we need to be here.
they could start their own fire service. They could try to contract. with-
Which is actually not uncommon for large universities.
They could try to contract with a different community, which. We'd like to add the
Question.
Oh, I
So there are
I
other-
see another contract, and B, hey, you want to get into a.
No, but I mean, the contract's gotta come up on a regular
It's gonna
basis.
have to be reduced sometime.
Not their fault, you know.
I think Nicholas would be fine.
Yeah, I think we might.
Probably not do it.
Yeah, it's gonna come, that's right, but he's been gone from over
Well,
there.
look at it from the other, let's say new contract comes up, we want to be up here, they go somewhere else.
Fine.
All of a sudden, we don't need all the people we have.
I thought we had a new contract this year. I
don't know.
I missed it, I mean, I probably wasn't
okay,
watching.
I thought I was told that.
Well, you did.
I'm sure, I think it's coming up soon.
Well,
I just don't know.
anyway, I'm gonna put my knowledge of the university hat on for a moment. And I will just say that at one time, I did discuss with the person long before I was anywhere near this committee, the university's contract for fire and EMS services. Okay. I will just say that the person I discussed it with is not at the university anymore, hasn't been there for a long time. And given the new leadership of the university in all areas, including those that would affect this contract, I don't think we should make any assumptions presuming what will or will not happen as a response to an effort to to work as partners. There are things that the university is able to do for the city. There are things that the city provides for the university, and we need to come to a balance of how we have a symbiotic relationship that makes both entities sustainable and attractive for new residents, new students, and the like. And I think we need to go into this with that kind of a positive attitude.
Oh, I agree 100% with that.
No,
Right now,
But you don't want to take a beating every time you haul a
Well,
kid out of the
right
hospital.
now.
No, we're supposed to be a
No,
community
it's-
university, so we sit down and come up with a plan. I mean, the reality, that would be idiotic. Picture the Tribune running a story where a dorm has a fire and a DeKalb fire truck 6 blocks away sat parked in its garage because it took the Sycamore fire truck 10 minutes to, I mean, that would just be idiotic.
I
Maybe
was just
when you look at contracts and,
So-
or we refigure the.
As we
I
get the
just-
contracts, as they expire, we're starting to go down the avenue of, is this really the cost we need? What's the real cost that needs to be
Fully
generated?
loaded.
So as they come, we're doing it, we're not going back and saying, well, you're in a contract now and.
Yeah.
No, just
So-
what Mike brought up, if a private business doesn't get into a contract.
Things where you look at the bottom line, are we making enough money, and it's like, yeah, we have to do that, but sometimes you take
And
a
we did
bigger
that
look, and it's like, all right, there's also you know what I mean?
And the special
Administrative
events
work in the
contract,
dorm.
we're just doing, right?
Yeah,
We're still in that sense that we both need,
yeah,
we have a need here and it was met. So
as
there,
DeKalb
they do
goes,
work.
or as Northern goes, so does DeKalb, frankly.
In a lot of areas. And you know, look, we're all in this, and we, I mean a very global we, we're all in this together. The businesses, the residents,
Yeah.
the visitors, we all have skin in the game with respect to making this a good community and
Yeah.
an attractive place to live, do business, and just to visit. And, you know, the bottom line is that we should never take any of the other entities for granted. And I'm talking from any perspective. Residents shouldn't take other residents, they should not take other businesses, they should not take the city. All of us have to work together. And, you know, this has not been an era of civility, but the only way that we're going to really make progress, and these issues are difficult. I mean, we've got some structural deficits in the city, and we need to work together and take common responsibility for finding a solution that is going to be workable, maybe not ideal, but workable for all the people that have to contribute to that solution.
I don't know where we ended.
Well,
Well,
you know, we were on, you know, the levy.
Contracts, yeah, and the levy.
the pilot fluid, water, all that.
So the transfer from the water fund to general fund is about $322,000. And it's like, we have to go up a little bit.
And the tip taxes are,
I don't have the tip
it's
information.
another income. It should be in the revenue stream, budget.
Yes, those are, but they're different. So the admin fees that are in here are part of that phase-out plan.
Right.
Right.
So FY18, it's, the budget is 678 for TIP 1, 113 for TIP 2, but TIP 2 goes away, so 19
Right.
is 0.
And, okay, there's a couple of different pieces to this, okay? So in 19, there's going to be, after 19, we're just going to get the property taxes from that area, and they just go through to the residents.
Right.
And so, you know, we got 1 year to fight with that issue. And then for the other tip, that's what, 2021?
22 is when it's, I think
And then we have to consider the effects as the new tip is being
22 is
considered.
what
Okay, as the new tip is being considered, we need to, make sure that we have a handle on this. But, I am assuming that if the new tip were to come in, that the base would be reset. Is that correct?
It resets, yes.
Okay. So
So any
we'll capture any increment that there might have been, which for a while there was negative. Okay. So what do you need from the committee with respect to the levy tonight?
Essentially, all I'm asking for is if you want to make a recommendation to City Council on how you think they should proceed on the levy. Last year,
When will this go to council?
the 18th,
Of
this month.
Oh,
September?
this
Or
Tuesday.
December?
Yes, this overview will be part of the budget
Deal.
measure discussion.
Okay, it's just the overview, it's not when they're gonna.
Oh, no,
do the
no,
adoption.
the estimated adoption will be, I think it's early November.
So we have another meeting.
Yeah, there's,
My suggestion.
we have another 2 meetings.
Yeah, my suggestion was going to be, in my view, the presentation of this ought to have two columns. It ought to have the 17 and the 18 numbers so that you can see the differences. And if we're going to adopt a series of accounting measures that incorporate these changes, I would like to see those netted out in each of the lines so that the council can fully see
How we
what in fact has been happening with property taxes in these other areas that have in fact been paying for some of these additional.
And what they should see is how that will likely increase the deficit. Because those funds will not be used for some of the other purposes. To the extent that that's an empirical question, to the extent that that's true, they should,
Yeah, right. I had a question. I got real excited when I was reading this. Steve, because it said, what it said, is the county's estimated increase in EAV for the city is $550 million. I'm thinking, where did that come from? Well, what it should have said, the county's estimated.
Oh, my gosh.
We aren't getting a $550 million increase.
Up to.
I will rephrase.
It's a $21 million increase, of which I am guessing what we talked about, that includes new construction, so what, 12 million is Cornerstone? But that's
No,
what,
Cornerstone is not.
that's what,
It won't be full.
won't be in the,
Nope.
won't be in there until.
It'll be full January 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that continues into the TIF, that will be in the.
okay, well, that's where I was looking at 21 million, to figure if over half comes from that, so obviously,
So it sounds to me like
combination of,
you gotta pick up your investment in the community so that
I just put a new air conditioner on top of my building.
there you go, there you go.
Get the tax.
And we'll make sure that, we'll make sure that, that's repaired.
Well, I'll tell you just a quick story. I had a guy I worked with, they got these middle guys for your electricity. And I've got to know one guy, and I just won't ever talk to anybody else, because I trust him, I've met him. And he said, I got another company that works on retrofitting your fixtures to LEDs. And I said, well, son, I'll talk, because Farmer Fleet was full of T12s.
Right.
There was, so the guy came out, we walked through the whole building, gave me a proposal, $22,000 for 180 fixtures, with a $21,000 rebate. I mean, I'm saying.
And you said there's no way I'm
Are
going.
you sure? I'll give you 1,800, no, but they changed them out. I can't believe the difference, I had half as many fixtures, that's much brighter.
Do we need to tell the special property?
No, because it's only might affect you.
It wouldn't. Fixtures were.
But it was, sometimes good things happen.
That's great.
The levy bill will be presented on the September 18th meeting for City Council.
I guess I'm asking, is it going to be presented in the way we just discussed it?
It's pretty much this memo with a few tweaks. And I
Okay, so it's not
probably
gonna
will
be-
not have any discussion on TIF.
Then I'm going to suggest that we have it changed for the next presentation after that.
For,
Council.
well, first of all, changing for FFC.
Well, yeah, with the intent of going to council.
I'm talking about moving money from these other funds.
Showing it the way it's.
Yeah, you know,
It's not moving any money.
Well,
per se.
I think what would be useful to see is, you know, here's the 7.9 million, okay, but here's what we could in fact get for the 7.9 million if we fund the pensions from property tax related sources. This is how much could be freed up to move to 1B.
Yeah. And in fact, we have been sourcing it from that because it's all going into one
Yes,
pot.
that's
So in my
right.
mind, it's always been sourced from that, we just never recognized it.
So we can fully fund the pensions without raising the rate.
Exactly.
From
Really?
That's an empirical question, but it's, we can do more without putting all of that on the new levy. That-
And we might look much better to the rating agencies then too.
Yes, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
true.
Which is very
Because
important for everybody.
that would be a sustainable source.
Right.
Right.
the way to do it.
Right, right, they would love that.
Yeah.
We would
Sustainable
look
and
so much
reliable.
better.
Because we definitely don't like number two where we're $1 million short. Revenue to expenditure.
You're already there, so right now,
Just
in the
rearrange
current
your
budget,
shares over.
you're not
Right.
funding seven.
No, that's the
For
big
IMRF,
one.
and you are not funding about 450 for police and fire, so you're already,
What those rating agencies will do.
that
for
actually
all
would
that.
help.
I agree.
All right.
It should be transparent through realistic.
Right, right,
And,
Right there, not from other sources.
yes.
okay, so we already had an
Oh, that's
update.
on the bill. Then,
No.
the whole, it doesn't change
So
the amount
this-
that's on the bill.
Right.
No, it
so if
doesn't.
you see
That would
this-
be invisible to the
Right.
taxpayer.
This is accounting. I mean,
No, the taxpayer, if the amount you levy is the 7.8, it'll show, well, either it'll show all the city of DeKalb, or, but I believe it breaks it into the.
it does, because when we
Versus
were
like
levying the
basic.
corporate levy, it did show the corporate and the pensions separately.
So it would show a line for police, fire, IMRF, social security, depending on how far you
Exactly.
go down.
Yeah.
It would not show whatever funding you're using from like the water pilot. That would not be indicated anywhere on the property.
Okay, I understand.
Right, it would be in the financial reports, both in the budget and in the comprehensive annual financial report.
Give me a brief description of, you mentioned water pilot.
The water department
Okay.
is an enterprise fund, okay? And the water department has property that there are buildings and other kinds of things that are on there that technically are receiving city services.
Okay, got it.
So it's an internal service payment where you're saying, well, if the water department wasn't using that, that property would be on the tax rolls.
So I'm looking.
So we're going to ask that the water department, as a separate enterprise fund, pays the city for the property taxes that would have been collected on that property.
Private ownership.
Has anybody ever looked, would it be better off for the city to wholly own it, to be part of the city and then a separate entity?
No, the water.
Oh, the water
is
department
part of
is,
the city.
it's just an enterprise fund. It's run like a business, it's not.
You're
separate.
thinking of the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District.
Yes.
Yeah, that's totally
A
different.
completely different critter.
The pilot is, there's a formula we use based on what our capital assets are
Right.
in water divisions, our department, so then we, well, it's actually a division, the division of public works, but that's what it gets charged us. So the one, it's similar in that as the assets depreciate, that amount will go down because it's based on the value of those assets. But as we, maintain our assets, then it should say where it's at.
Substantial investment.
Yes.
Was that ever discussed for the airport?
Say the
Yeah, I'm
pilot,
sorry.
The airport?
Oh,
we do charge for some services to the airport. I don't believe we have a pilot, and right now the airport fund does not, not like that.
No, I mean, you're thinking about,
Well, the assets are there.
I mean, you know, just the land. You know, the land, even if you value the land at minimal farmland, I mean, you're talking about still a substantial.
They gotta work out.
Okay, but here's the caution on the airport. This is the first year of the budget where I have the revenues, I think, actually equaling the expenditures because we're doing that fuel pricing strategy.
Right.
And the airport fund still owes the general fund almost $400,000 in cash. So that fund isn't sustainable on its own as it is right now. We're working on it.
My whole wow was, that it was something that I never thought about. I mean, it was just, I mean, I'm not saying it's a good idea, I'm just saying, oh my gosh.
Is all the airport in the city?
Yes. But my real caution on it is they don't have any money to actually give a general fund. So
Well-
it becomes difficult.
That's a separate, I would,
What is that?
again, say that's a separate issue.
Right now, we gotta go look at the airport and see what.
Yeah, it's just-
Certain things take time, you know, it's like, let's be patient with it, it's not gonna. Look at cities that have done that and gotten rid of them, and the regrets they've had, when airports in nearby communities picked up. I know it's been a bone of contention, I've been on this committee
Well,
for
you know, I
4
mean-
years, but.
I mean, I think you can, at this particular stage, there are a lot of options that you can consider, but one that I would say just simply is not viable from the information that we've received, and that is to abandon the airport. It would just cost
80
way,
reasons.
yeah, I mean, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Are those assets on the books? All
For the airport,
of them? In their balance sheet?
are all the assets listed under our airport? Yeah.
We actually have title to all of that?
Land, everything, buildings.
I was wondering about it, so 80% of it's federal money. I didn't know.
Right, I do think at some point, there's triggers when the federal government gives you money, depending on circumstances. Clearly, I have not gone
Well,
back
they
and
can take
looked,
it back.
that they can take it back, or
I'm serious.
if you abandon it, you might
If you
actually have to
abandon
pay all the.
Right, no,
That's the
that's
catch.
key thing.
But it's owned by the city of DeKalb. It's
Correct.
not a
Yes.
separate entity.
No, it's a fund of the city of DeKalb. So
Now,
we-
Bob, if you can find a way, I mean, we have been working on this forever. No, I'm not being
The
funny.
irritating thing about
If we
this-
can find a way to make that a regional airport, it would be a heck of a lot truer to what it's serving as.
Exactly. The service provided is not just for city
Of
of
DeKalb.
DeKalb.
Mr. Pettit?
Yes.
Can I offer some information?
Sure.
I attend the airport advisory board meetings, and you all may want to at some point look at the study that has just been done. Also, as a point of information, over the last several years, millions of dollars have been expended at the airport, federal dollars, state dollars, and city dollars. And it's also, the airport itself is in 2 congressional districts.
Oh,
And
Okay.
there has been a concerted effort on the part of some of us to get the Congress people, both the potential and the existing, to come and see the airport so they can understand the investment that has been made over the years and how it is an economic engine, as has been just said here, not just for the city, but regionally. And they are thinking along those lines. So you may want to
Well, and
get some information there to ponder that.
at least, you know, regardless of who you support in the race, the bottom line is that one of those members of Congress is a pilot, is he not?
Yes, and he's been here and stuff, but they need to be, we need to do a better job of pushing that and getting them involved, and the communication needs to go on so that we can proceed to make it a viable economic engine for the area. So, but we can, maybe y'all might want to look at this study, and maybe that's something that I can make arrangements for you if you want.
Okay.
Part of that was presented at council. not
Yes,
long
it
ago.
was,
Yeah,
just recently.
yeah.
Is that ever
Watched it.
online? Is it
Should be online.
Deposit at the airport?
No, this,
No.
I think the first year where I have a budget that we hope will be down.
So even when the
Yeah,
Almanac
that's-
was going, and the university had 25,000, didn't make a difference.
No.
No.
I think the largest plane can hold 30 people, or no, not even.
Oh, no,
They wanted to try to move towards looking at thinking of the larger planes with 30 people. That's a lot.
the airport can handle. My understanding is, first of all, they've got runways that are comparable to Midway.
Yeah.
And now, I don't know what's that?
It's longer.
Yeah. I don't know what the weight capacity is, but, you know, Utah, they flew into O'Hare, found that to be absolutely ridiculous. They flew out of Rockford. Now, if we could get the teams that have to fly in for football or basketball games to be able to use the
fuel.
right, and refuel there, that would be great. And the university has, as I understand it, at one time, they were a partner in terms of trying to explore that. We'd have to ask Mr. Cleveland as to what the hitches are with respect to that.
Weight heritage is the biggest.
Well, I also think there's an issue with respect to having a control
The
tower
control
that's
tower.
staffed in
Bigger
there.
issue, yes. You
I
have to
think,
have-
yeah, I think that was one of the issues.
I do believe they discussed some of this in the strategic plan.
Sure.
So I can email you guys that.
Okay. With respect to the TIF issue that was raised by Mayor Chronopoulos, I think it's important for transparency's sake, you know, regardless of what the legal answer is, regardless of what the moral answer is, regardless of what the political answer is, the more that we can be transparent in every dollar that is taken in and spent in TIF, whether you're talking about administrative or you're talking about the actual projects. I think that transparency is important. And I think that it's most important to be able to come up with a city plan, in quotes, that will be palatable to everyone while not selling the city short. I mean, there are administrative costs that are associated with a tax increment financing district. Currently, the TIFs are about 25% of the EAV in the city. And so that's pretty substantial. And
Say that again?
the TIFs are about 25% of the equalized assessed valuation of the city.
That's a good chunk.
Right around that. And so, you know, when there are things that are going to be allowable by law, and that's tightened up a little bit in the last several years, but when you consider that 1/5 to 1/4 of the city is in those TIF districts, it won't be with the new TIF, it starts to get to be an issue that can be, that reasonable people can disagree about how you attribute administrative costs that are indirect as opposed to saying, you know, this is absolutely, positively, directly, this is somebody who only works in the TIF, kind of thing. You know, just to give an example from our previous discussions, you know, all of the street money at one point was in the TIF. That was pretty much where it was
Yeah.
being spent. So do you take all the street department and lay that out as an administrative cost of the TIF? No, I don't think you do. But that's where things start to get kind of a little bit nebulous, because there are things that legitimately you may be able to say, you know, hey, we spent X amount of time and X amount of billable hours, if you will, in the TIF, but there also are political considerations, taxpayer considerations, finance considerations, legal considerations, and at this stage, you know, I'll open it for discussion, but my advice is please be as open as possible. I know it's a difficult job because you weren't here when a lot of the stuff took place. Hopefully, some of that can be reconstructed. I think that there's going to be a lot of it, my personal opinion, there's going to be a lot of it that's a matter of just showing what it looks like. And, you know, when things add up, honestly, it doesn't take long to get to $800,000 depending on what you're charging on. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that you may be able to come up with a figure that is legitimately back for $800,000 of expenses. Should it be that? Well, that's something that the joint review board and the city's going to have to.
Are they actually going to take the time and effort to go back and do some of that kind of analysis?
That was my question. Do you want to go back to day one?
What's the purpose?
That's what they want.
What's the purpose of it? Who's asking? Just the school district?
No.
I mean, that's how it came across on the paper.
Yeah, that's how it came across the paper, yeah.
It was like the school district had it.
You've gone to the joint review board meetings,
The
can
the
you?
school district is kind of leading it, but as it evolved, it was pretty evident that there were several questions that needed to be answered that have not been answered, and mostly it centers around the reason for the high amount of administrative costs, and how is that justified?
But who's asking that question?
At this point in time, pretty much the entire JRB, and that's,
My perception reading it was the JRB, the school looked at it and questioned that the JRB got involved, there was irregularities.
they
I thought,
finally did their job.
What a bad way though for it to hit the newspaper, because then I'm thinking, also you're saying, it looks like there's all kinds of slush money going around, that was my take on it. It
That's
gives the city
why I
a very
think-
negative,
Right.
and I would agree, there's always administrative fees and costs, and they didn't really explain how that, but of course they're gonna go back to day one, because if the stuff wasn't done right, then they're gonna go back and figure out every penny,
Yeah.
because then somebody.
Well, you guys made some excellent comments about the same discussion with the fire department, the rates, and NIU. And if you want to have an argument about that in the public session and get everyone involved that way, that's one approach that you could take, or you could meet face to face and say, I've got these concerns, and have somebody try to respond to that. And now you've got this circumstance where somebody feels obligated to, in my opinion, waste a substantial amount of time and effort to go back and justify administrative costs, when most of the people are at the city weren't there 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, when these things transpired.
Well,
So, and I gotta say this, the school district had the best intergovernmental agreement with TIF and the city of DeKalb that existed in the entire state. We had multiple consultants come. I was on the finance advisory committee, I was on the school board, and before we ever gave anything to the city, we said we had to be made whole. And that analysis was based on there being no TIF as to what made whole was. And there's an intergovernmental agreement established that made the school district whole. So I did not understand how at this point that came up. Because they, in particular, were handled very, very well and very separately with good accounting and numerous meetings between the city and the school district. So when I read that, I was really set back.
Well, remember
And I just want to
also-
explain that to people.
Also, was it in the last week that you have to take what's published in the paper with a big grain of salt, because they said that this new electrical deal was going to save residents $100 per month.
No,
That's what they put in
that
the
was just,
article.
no, but if you read the article, they did. I mean, they did say in one line, they said, but they had, no, but the rest of the article said $100 a year.
No, that's just like the $550 million, our EAV increase.
Yes.
But, okay,
Yeah, the city council knows, but it's at 293, I think
well,
it was
see,
293 over
I
the
think
years.
one of the problems is that, and I believe in transparency in government.
Yes.
But, you know, one of the things that Tom said, this should not be being played out the way that it's being played out after 30 years. And the reason why I say that is that I believe that the question is relevant. And I believe that the question is most relevant with respect to the new TIF.
Right.
Okay? But one of the things that people need to understand, and this is only a legal issue, this is not anything about the right way to do things. The Joint Review Board has nothing to say about the adoption of the TIF. In this case, it is advisory. There are certain types of TIFs where you have to have the Joint Review Board's approval. Now, is it smart? Is it advisable? Would I ever recommend to anyone to take advantage of that? No, absolutely not. Because if you can't get the support of the overlapping taxing units, get them to trust you, get them to believe that what you are asking for as your share of administration of the TIF, if you cannot convince them of that, then there is a problem. So fundamentally, I agree with what's being asked for. I'm not sure that I would push it to the point of going back 30 years with an audit, essentially, of every line item that came out of the TIF.
They have no
I
authority.
wasn't even
They
finding.
have no authority to order no audit, do they? Who has the authority to say?
No, they don't have the authority to order an audit, but this is, this is playing out in a political environment, and that's not, I'm not using that as a negative term.
But it's reality. If they do fight it, it's gonna have negative consequences, and you're gonna lose public trust, and you're gonna lose, I mean, I agree, it's a mess, and I'm not a big fan of this.
But this agreement you're talking about, I believe,
It was in the 90s.
Yeah.
but
And that's
that
been
needs
carried
to be,
forward.
that needs to be brought forward and said, hey.
The business manager at the school district is well aware of it.
And state law also changed. The school funding formula changed so that school districts got some relief
Oh, yeah,
with respect to the TIFs. And so,
substantial relief.
there is a question. $800,000 sounds like a lot, okay? But if you think about that, if they're producing $8 million in increment a year, that's 10%. An administrative fee on something of 10% of the magnitude of this would not necessarily be out of whack. But it's a reasonable question to ask, okay, how'd you calculate it and what's it going for?
I don't think it helps, and I think there was something contributing where there was a city, they were talking 14 million, and TIF funds were moved inappropriately.
Well, and also, we've been sitting around the table for several years now about reducing the dependency of the city on TIF and dropping the amount that's being taken for administrative fees. The question that one would ask is, what is the solution? I mean, I don't understand what is necessarily the outcome that is desired. I mean, the city in and of itself, I mean, through Finance Advisory, we already identified that they can't rely on these things and that they should not be relying on the TIF for operational support of the city beyond that which is necessary to administer the TIF. So,
Chair Peddle?
yes,
Can
please.
this committee trace back, granted, there's an argument to be made going back 30 years, though you might learn something from the negative and positive impacts of TIF over the years. But can the committee go back, let's say, 2 to 3 years and assess and investigate how many dollars have gone towards administrative fees and see if it was properly expended? And if that needs to be improved, or if that needs to be documented more efficiently, so that we're not back in this predicament. You certainly can go back 2 to 3 years, that should not be difficult.
The problem, I agree. I mean,
Do it.
well, but how do you identify the dollars?
Overhead allocation is a booger.
Right.
It is ugly, and it's always a guesstimate.
And how many years are we talking about? Is this 1 year for 800,000 or 30 years? The total.
Well, no, it's not, it's 800,000 a year
Per annum.
is what they're
Well, that's a
worried
different-
about.
That's a different issue.
Oh, yeah, that's a different end. Right. That was not clear.
But, you know, we can look into it. Yeah, I will talk to Molly. We've talked about the issue before. And, you know, I'm not familiar with exactly what is available in terms of financial records. I fear, and I'm not defending it, I fear that money comes in, goes into the general fund, and then it's like any other general fund dollar, and that any effort to put specific line items with that dollar may be difficult.
Yeah.
However, what you can do is you can go in for the various line items and say, okay, of this line item, this would have been a reasonable chargeback to the TIF. And so you could build from the bottom. Do you think that would be helpful, where you say, okay, you know, we're going to take all the items that are in the budget that could be attributed to the TIF, and here's what we would consider to be a defensible number that could be attributed there, and let's see how it adds up.
But there's no way to go into the budget and see what has been attributed to administrative costs and where it has gone? You can't find that?
We will try. I don't know, because
Just asking.
I don't know. I would think that in the TIF budget, and there should be a TIF budget, I would think in the TIF budget, there should be a breakdown, but,
That would be good.
you know, we'll have to see. It's an empirical question. So, do you have anything to contribute that you know as of this point? I know you were frustrated by just trying to find the records. You know, and each year, the Tax Increment Financing District produces a state-required report.
That's an annual report, then.
Yeah, those annual reports were filed. Those annual reports were all found to be acceptable by the state, but they did not have the level of detail that the attorney for the school district wanted.
Oh, this was the attorney?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the attorney.
yeah.
Really?
And I don't know if he's citing law
No,
or
he's
just,
not, no.
want.
it's just
No.
curiosity.
No, because they,
Strictly curiosity.
as I recall, there was a quote, and again, you have to take it, that everything appears to be legal. They just want an account.
Well, people in jail want out. Lord have mercy, can you just see like some janitor doing tick marks like an attorney for every 10 minutes, what a county was working on?
Okay.
No, I think that this is a big picture question,
Yeah.
and it deserves a big picture answer, and, you know, I made a lot of my career on challenging badly done tax increment financing districts. So, and I, you know, went toe to toe with the city on some in public meetings and in public presentations. So I'm not an apologist for tips. Some of them in the city have been good, some of them not so good, some of them, you know. So let's see what we can find. And I don't want this to become a battle where the opportunity cost of city staff time is being overwhelmed by this request.
And is this an external attorney or an attorney that's a staff member of
Oh, no,
the
it's not a
school
staff member.
district?
They don't have it.
Well, I can see those billable hours going to the moon. Sorry, may I ask you a question that had nothing to do with any of this? Over on page 8, how in this world is that homeowner in the Heartland Fields number 14 paying $68 a year off of the income, the extended levy was $2,500, expenditures $3,000. And I'm looking at all these others and I'm just wanting to know, are there like,
There's only certain parcels that are related to each SSA.
so there's a very small number of parcels? Okay, thank
And
you.
it goes to a very specific.
Okay, all right.
Just out of curiosity, what is Harlan Fields? Never heard of it.
Me either.
I don't
We
know.
talked about this.
No, wait a minute, I think, isn't Heartland Fields, I believe Heartland Fields is one of the sections of that
I think it's.
subdivision west
Subdivision.
of the Knolls. But I'm,
West
maybe-
of the Knolls. Oh,
Southwest.
Out by Schnucks.
Devon Farm?
oh,
Devon
further down.
no, that, you know, that's the name of the one
Further
that I was
out
trying to
Malta
think,
Road?
no, I don't think that's right. Let's look it up, okay, I mean, look, it's an empirical question, I mean,
It's a new one to me.
well, that may be why there's very few.
That number just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's not the whole city. The one other thing I want to point out, we didn't really get into the library levy, but the library director's intention is to kind of try to absorb, or keep the same rate and absorb any growth in the EAV. So her levy's written in that same manner with the most.
Okay. I was very attentive to that.
We need to get that money back.
And then I did show what the abatement would be. So what the library intends on doing is asking for the full levy and creating an abatement
That's
levy
what we should be
for
doing.
Yes,
the
yes.
$992,500.
Right, it's on page
On page
67.
seven.
Sorry for.
Yeah,
And then there'd be the fill in the blank abatement for the
yes.
growth portion.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
So for operation purposes, they want to capture the 4%.
Right, so they would capture all, but then rebate for the 1 year.
And for the city, we're not making specific recommendations, I guess, from what I'm hearing thus far, until we net out the rest of these other earnings that we have
Yes.
that might apply.
I just won't have that. So you will see a very similar report for city council.
Oh.
But with what is adjusted.
Okay.
Or you can mention that conversation.
Heartland Fields is the subdivision that is on the very north end of Normal Road. Normal and Dressel.
I know where that
Yeah,
is.
there's some
Yeah,
single-family
yeah.
homes there. It's
Yeah,
a-
and it's all
relatively small.
recently newly built.
Well, 2004 is the
Well,
home that I'm
It's
showing.
been here the last 20 years.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. So it's that's a very small.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll
it
sleep
is
well
lovely.
tonight.
It's like a city
Now
block.
we know.
It's a couple.
Subdivision is
right.
all we have.
So for the,
Oh, and, wait a minute, I'm sorry.
yes.
Okay, never mind, go ahead.
I was gonna say, for the 5-year forecast, that's what identifies what, I was calling funding gap.
Yeah.
So the council, their next meeting on the 18th, they'll have this overview on the tax levy, they'll have all the budget reduction information, which applies to this, basically addresses what we're looking at in the 5-year forecast, and then that's what you guys will see the next meeting.
Have they given you direction on the preparation of the 19 budget as to how to fill this 1.68 million gap?
That's what we're gonna start talking about on the 18th.
So they haven't given you direction to do,
Correct. Right, to just,
cut costs by that
right,
1.68.
right, no, I'm not there yet. No.
They haven't provided
Nope, they're
direction.
gonna get a list of options that they can look
Okay,
at the next meeting.
okay,
And then that will, I'll update this group with all that information.
okay, because at some point I would hope we make a recommendation prior to getting very far down the path.
That's what these next meetings are for. So then I'm hoping that the proposed budget will basically come out of that joint meeting you guys have with city council.
When is that?
November 5th.
That's awful late. Then you gotta redo the whole budget. If there's major changes.
True. But I'm hoping through all of the workshops and FAC meetings, we can get to a good point that I have a solid.
We do have several meetings
One second.
scheduled.
26.
Wednesday, the 26th, and what was the one after that?
That was in the.
It was, if I asked you if you wanted to do the October, was it 10th or 11th?
Oh, okay, so I'm out on Tuesdays until, the last Tuesday I have to teach is October 16th, the last Tuesday night. So after that, if people prefer Tuesdays, we go back to Tuesdays. But 2 weeks from tonight is the intended meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we're considering 2 weeks after that for another meeting.
Is it the 10th or the 11th?
I have to go back to,
The 10th
is
would,
Wednesday.
the 10th would be
11th is
Wednesday,
Thursday.
11th is Thursday.
All right.
I thought I put both out as dates we can so I'll have to look.
All right. But the next one is the 26th.
Correct.
There will be,
What's our focus going to be for that? 5-year plan? Is that what we're looking at? or-
I think we're going to come back to the levy probably,
Partially.
and the 5-year plan.
Okay.
And I think, I think we need to start pushing the council in terms of direction with respect, the reason we started this early was to get some direction into the budget process so we weren't doing it all at the last minute like we have the last few years. Let's have an idea of the path that we want to go and recommend to the city council. Okay? Questions? I'll give one more chance for, nothing? Okay. All right, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Please have